The battlefield stretched across the valley, filled with smoke, broken weapons, and cries of the wounded. Two mighty alien kingdoms had fought for years, and both were desperate for victory. Their armies stood ready, warriors in strange armors, banners torn by the wind, and blood already staining the soil. Yet all of them, every soldier, looked not to their kings, but to a single figure standing tall at the center. She was the Spellbinder, a woman of unearthly beauty, her eyes glowing like burning stars. Her voice was said to be sweeter than any song, yet more dangerous than 1,000 blades. She raised her hands and whispered words that none could understand. A shimmering light spread from her lips, floating through the air like invisible chains. One by one, soldiers dropped their swords and fell to their knees, their minds no longer their own. No warrior resisted her spell. Men who had sworn to die for their kings now bowed before her without a fight. Generals trembled, their wills breaking, and whole legions surrendered in silence. The valley became not a battlefield, but a stage for her command. The alien kings watched with fear and awe, for she was their weapon, but also their greatest threat. In the distance, dragged forward by alien guards, came a lone prisoner. A human, dressed in torn clothes, his face bruised from battle, yet his eyes still burning with strange defiance. The soldiers pushed him to the ground before her, expecting him to kneel like the others. The Spellbinder stepped closer, her beauty shining like a star against the smoke and fire. Her voice wrapped around him like silk as she whispered, "Bow to me, human, and you will serve forever." The air grew heavy, the chains of magic pressing against his mind. For any other being, resistance would have been impossible. The guards waited for him to collapse, for his knees to strike the dirt. But instead, a sound escaped his lips, a laugh. It was not cruel nor mad, but warm and mocking at the same time. The laughter cut through the silence of the battlefield like a blade. And in that instant, the invisible chains shattered. The Spellbinder froze, her glowing eyes wide with shock. Never before had anyone broken free of her enchantment. The laughter echoed again, rising louder, filling the valley. The soldiers stared in disbelief, some whispering in fear, others with hope. The kings shouted in rage, demanding she crush the human immediately. But her power faltered, her voice caught in her throat. She could feel something breaking inside herself, something she had never known before, doubt. The human rose to his feet, still smiling. He looked at her without fear, without trembling. "You think you hold power," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "But your magic is only fear, and fear breaks when faced with truth." His words struck like arrows, not just at her, but at every soldier forced under her spell. A murmur ran through the armies, warriors blinking as if waking from a dream. The Spellbinder tried again, her hands glowing, her words sharper. But again the human laughed, and again the magic shattered like glass. For the first time in centuries, she felt powerless. Her beauty, her voice, her enchantments, none of it worked on him. He was a flame in the dark, burning away her shadows. And in that flame, she saw something terrifying and new. The battlefield, once her throne, was no longer under her control. The human had broken the silence with nothing but laughter, and that sound would change the galaxy forever. The alien kings screamed for their soldiers to attack, but hesitation spread through the ranks. If one man could resist, could they not resist as well? The Spellbinder's heart raced as she stared at the human. He smiled back at her, not with hate, but with something strange, something she could not understand. And though the armies stood ready for slaughter, all she could hear was the echo of his laugh, a laugh that cracked her spell and shook her soul. The valley trembled as if the world itself held its breath. Every warrior, every king, every captive waited for what would come next. The Spellbinder, the most feared woman in the galaxy, felt her hand shake. She had bound thousands with her magic, yet one man had undone it with nothing but a smile. She whispered to herself in disbelief, impossible. But the human laughed once more, and the impossible became real. The battlefield lay in silence, broken only by the echo of laughter that refused to fade. The sorceress, the spellbinder, stood frozen as if her heart had been pierced. Never had her magic failed, never had her power been mocked. Yet this human had done both with a single laugh. The kings shouted from their thrones, demanding she destroy him, but their words reached her as whispers, weak and unimportant. Her eyes remained locked on the human, the man who stood tall even in chains. Guards shoved him forward, dragging him across the dirt, but he walked as if they carried no weight. His head was held high, his smile unbroken, and even when they pushed him to his knees, he lifted his chin like a man who knelt to no one. The spellbinder stepped closer, her beauty radiant, her voice sharper than before. "You will bow," she whispered, the words curling like smoke. "You will beg, you will kneel." But the man only smiled, his eyes filled with something alien to her, humor, courage, defiance. He laughed again, low and steady, and the guards who held him flinched as if the sound itself carried power. The sorceress narrowed her eyes, raising her hand to weave another spell. Threads of glowing energy shimmered in the air, wrapping around his arms, his chest, his throat. The chains of magic pressed down, heavy and unbreakable, enough to crush the will of any warrior. Yet his gaze never wavered, his lips curled again, and his laughter broke the chains into sparks of light. The soldiers gasped, the kings shouted, but the spellbinder's heart beat faster with something she had not known in centuries. Fear, not for her power, but for herself. She ordered the guards to take him to her chamber, her voice firm though her mind trembled. The kings objected, demanding his death, but she silenced them with a glance. She had never explained her actions to anyone, and she would not start now. The human was hers to question, to break, or to understand. The armies obeyed, dragging him through the smoke and fire into the dark halls of her fortress. Inside, the walls glowed with strange runes, symbols of old magic that pulsed like living veins. The guards chained him to the stone floor, expecting her to finish what she began. But instead of destroying him, she dismissed them, her voice soft yet commanding. They hesitated, confused by her hesitation, but none dared defy her. When the doors closed, silence filled the chamber, and only two remained, the spellbinder and the human who defied her. She circled him like a predator, her gown flowing like liquid fire, her eyes bright as twin stars. "You are not like the others," she said, her tone both curious and dangerous. "No one resists my voice, no one breaks my chains, yet you laugh as if I am nothing." The man tilted his head, his smile never leaving. "Maybe your magic does not work on humans," he said, his words light as if mocking a game. "Or maybe," he added, leaning forward despite the chains, "you are not as powerful as you believe." Her breath caught, though she masked it with a scowl. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had dared to call her weak. She raised her hand again, summoning fire and light, but she did not release it. Instead, she let it fade, her curiosity stronger than her anger. She asked, "What gives you such strength when even kings kneel at my feet?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. "It is not strength," he said. "It is choice. It is knowing that no one can own me unless I let them." His voice carried no fear, no false bravado, only truth. Her mind twisted with questions, with doubts that gnawed at her like shadows in the dark. All her life, she had been told her beauty was irresistible, her voice unbreakable, her magic eternal. Yet this human shattered those truths with nothing but laughter. And worse, he looked at her not with fear or worship, but with eyes that saw her as something she had never been before. Not a goddess, not a weapon, but a woman. The spellbinder turned away, her heart racing. She had enslaved entire armies, broken kings, and destroyed worlds. Yet this one man unsettled her more than any war. His words echoed in her mind, his laughter in her chest. For the first time, she felt the chains of her own power, binding her tighter than any magic. And she wondered, was she the captor or was she the prisoner? The man leaned back against the stone, still smiling. "You don't know what scares you more," he said softly, "that I resist you, or that you cannot resist me." Her eyes flashed, anger mixing with something deeper, something she could not name. And though she said nothing, the silence between them was louder than any spell. In the heart of her fortress, the most feared sorceress in the galaxy faced the one thing she had never known. Not defeat, not weakness, but doubt. And as the humans' laughter echoed again, she realized the war outside was nothing compared to the battle within her own soul. The fortress walls shook with whispers, carried through stone like wind through trees. Word of the humans spread quickly among the soldiers, servants, and even the enslaved lords who lived under the spellbinder's command. They whispered to the man who laughed at chains, who broke spells as if they were nothing. Fear turned to curiosity. Curiosity turned to hope, and hope was more dangerous than any blade. In her chamber, the spellbinder sat across from the human, her eyes fixed on him as if staring long enough would uncover his secret. She had tried every enchantment she knew, every illusion, every song. Yet each time his laughter shattered the spell like glass breaking against stone. The sound of it echoed in her ears, even when he was silent, a reminder that her power was not absolute. "You mock me," she said, her voice trembling though she tried to hide it. "You insult me with every laugh. Do you not fear me, human?" He smiled, his chains clinking softly as he leaned back. "I fear many things," he admitted, "but not you." Her breath caught again, though she forced herself to stand tall. "You should, for I could end you with a thought." "And yet you haven't," he replied, his tone calm, his eyes steady. The spellbinder turned away, her long cloak trailing like liquid fire across the floor. She hated the doubt that grew inside her, hated that her heart raced when he spoke. She told herself he was nothing, just a prisoner, just another voice she would silence. But no matter how many times she repeated the lie, it did not feel true. Beyond the chamber, soldiers began to change. They remembered the laughter, the way it cracked her spells. Some of them began to resist, their minds pushing back against her invisible chains. They looked at her with hesitation instead of worship, and though they still obeyed, the cracks in their loyalty widened each day. One evening, she stood on the balcony of her fortress, staring down at the camps of her armies. Thousands of soldiers moved like shadows, yet their movements were not as sharp as before. She could sense it, their hearts no longer fully hers. The human's defiance was spreading like fire, unseen yet unstoppable. Inside the chamber, the human spoke again. "You think your magic is eternal, but it's only borrowed," he said. "Power built on fear will always break, because fear fades when someone finds courage." His words pierced her deeper than any blade. She wanted to silence him, to drown him in spells, but each time she tried, his laughter destroyed them. And now, worse than his resistance, she realized something terrifying. She wanted to hear him laugh. For centuries, she had been feared, worshipped, obeyed, yet never had anyone treated her as he did. He looked at her not as a goddess, not as a monster, but as a person. His eyes did not bow, and in that refusal, she felt something awaken within herself. She hated it, yet she could not let it go. The alien kings grew restless, watching her hesitation. They had trusted her to crush enemies, to bend armies, but now she faltered before one man. They whispered among themselves, plotting, their eyes sharp with suspicion. If the spellbinder weakened, their entire empire would crumble. And in their greed, they began to plan how to control her, or destroy her. In the darkness of her chamber, she confronted the human once more. "Why do you resist? What makes you stronger than all others?" she demanded. He answered with that same maddening calm. "Because I know who I am," he said. "Your magic cannot change that." She stared at him, her hands trembling as sparks of power flickered at her fingertips. She wanted to break him, yet feared that in breaking him, she might shatter herself. That night, as she lay alone in her chamber, the whispers of rebellion reached her ears. Some soldiers no longer bowed when she passed. Some dared to look her in the eye. The cracks in her spell grew wider, and she knew the source. One man, one laugh, one truth had shaken the foundation of her reign. The spellbinder closed her eyes, and for the first time in centuries, she dreamed. Not of conquest, not of chains, but of freedom she had never known. And in that dream she saw his face, smiling, laughing, unbroken. She awoke with her heart racing, with her power trembling, and she whispered to herself, "He is not the prisoner." The words lingered in the night, soft as a secret, dangerous as a promise. The fortress that had once been her throne now felt like a cage. The armies that had once obeyed without question now whispered in shadows. And the spellbinder, the woman who had enslaved worlds, stood on the edge of something she had never faced. Not war, not betrayal, but change. And at the heart of it all was the human, whose laughter echoed louder than her spells. A laugh that turned cracks into fractures, and fractures into freedom. The spellbinder sat alone in her chamber, the firelight casting long shadows across the walls. Her hands trembled as she stared at the runes etched into the stone, symbols of power that had once meant certainty. For centuries, she had believed her strength unshakable, her control absolute. Yet now her thoughts circled endlessly around a single human prisoner. Every time he laughed, her chains broke, her magic shattered, and her pride cracked like glass. She remembered his words, spoken so calmly, so boldly. "Your magic is only fear, and fear fades." The memory made her chest tighten in ways she could not explain. She should have silenced him long ago, erased him from existence as she had done with countless enemies. But something held her back, something she had never known before. Night after night, she returned to him, speaking with him, questioning him, testing him. And each night, she found herself more unsettled, more curious, more drawn to the flame he carried. He spoke of humanity, of a world without spells, without chains. He told her of strength born not from control, but from unity, from laughter, from love. Words she had no place for, yet words that refused to leave her mind. "Do you not tire of being feared?" he asked one evening, his voice steady, his eyes bright. She turned away, unwilling to answer. Fear was power. Fear was survival. Fear was all she had ever known. But as she stood there, she realized fear also made her a prisoner. Every army, every king, every soldier bowed to her because they had no choice. And now, faced with one who would not bow, she questioned whether any of it had ever been real. The dilemma burned in her chest, twisting like fire and ice. She was the spellbinder, breaker of wills, queen of chains, the weapon of empires. Yet before this one man, she felt like nothing more than a woman, uncertain, trembling, and lost. Her pride demanded she crush him, yet her heart whispered she listen. And every laugh he gave struck deeper than any sword. Outside the fortress, rebellion stirred. Soldiers who once obeyed without question began to resist. Whispers of freedom spread faster than her enchantments could silence them. The kings grew restless, suspicious of her hesitation. They demanded proof of her loyalty, proof that she still ruled with iron chains. But she gave them only silence, her mind divided between power and truth. One night, standing on her balcony, she looked down upon her armies. Tens of thousands of warriors knelt, but their eyes flickered with doubt. She realized their loyalty was fragile, built only on fear, and she wondered if their chains broke as easily as his, would they still stand with her? For the first time in her life, she had no answer. She returned to the chamber where he was kept, her steps heavy, her voice sharp. "Tell me why I cannot break you," she demanded. He met her gaze with that same calm fire. "Because I choose not to be broken," he replied. Chains mean nothing when the mind is free. The words pierced her heart like arrows, for she knew they were true. And in her silence, she admitted what she could not speak aloud. She envied him. The sorceress who had enslaved worlds now found herself bound by questions she had never dared to ask. Was her power strength, or was it weakness hidden behind illusions? Was she free, or was she just another prisoner of her own chains? The human had no army, no magic, no crown, yet he stood taller in chains than she did in her throne. And that truth left her shaken. In the stillness of night, she whispered to herself, "What am I without my spell?" The answer terrified her more than any enemy, because she was not sure she existed beyond it. The kings pressed harder, threatening her with whispers of betrayal. They feared her weakness, feared the rebellion, feared the human who defied her. And in their fear, they began to plot her downfall. The spellbinder sensed it, yet she did nothing, torn between the world she had built and the one the human showed her. Her dilemma grew heavier with each passing day. To keep her power meant crushing him, silencing his laughter, proving again that fear was stronger than freedom. But to let him live, to listen to his words, to let his defiance spread, meant surrendering the throne she had built in blood and chains. Her pride screamed one truth, her heart whispered another. And for the first time in her long life, she realized she could not control her own fate. The spellbinder stood before him once more, her voice soft, her eyes conflicted. "You are dangerous," she said, "not with hate, but with something close to awe. Not because you resist me, but because you make me question myself." The human only smiled, his laughter soft this time. "Then perhaps you are closer to freedom than you believe," he answered. She turned away, unable to reply. The fire in her heart grew stronger, not of anger, but of something she had no word for. And as she walked into the darkness of her chamber, she realized her true enemy was no longer the human, no longer the kings, no longer the rebellion. Her true enemy was the mirror of doubt within herself. And that battle would decide the fate of empires. The spellbinder's fortress, once a monument of silence and obedience, now trembled with whispers of doubt. The human's laughter had spread like a secret fire, slipping past stone walls and heavy chains. Soldiers who once bowed without hesitation now glanced at one another with questions in their eyes. And though no sword had yet been lifted against her, she could feel the shift in the air. Loyalty built on fear was breaking, replaced by something far more dangerous, hope. The kings grew restless, watching their armies slip from control. They gathered in the great hall, their voices sharp with anger. "She falters," one hissed, "her spell weakens. If she cannot command, she is of no use to us," said another. The kings had always feared her, but now they feared losing her power more. Their whispers became plans, their plans became schemes. And in their greed, they plotted to bind her with chains stronger than her own. In her private chamber, the spellbinder sat across from the human, his chains rattling softly as he shifted. "You are destroying everything," she told him, her voice heavy with both anger and confusion. "Armies crumble, kings doubt me, my power fades, and it is all because of you." The human smiled faintly, his eyes calm. "No," he said, "it is because of them." He tilted his head toward the fortress walls, where the sounds of soldiers murmuring carried faintly. "They see you hesitate, they see your doubt, and they realize they can choose too." His words struck her like lightning, for she knew he spoke the truth. She had once ruled with certainty, with chains and commands, but now her hesitation spread through her armies like cracks in glass. She clenched her fists, her pride urging her to silence him, to crush the rebellion before it grew. Yet another voice whispered inside her, softer, urging her to listen. And that voice only grew louder every time she looked at him. The rebellion began in shadows, small at first. A soldier refusing to bow, another speaking against the kings, another refusing to carry out orders. Each act of defiance was small, but together they grew into something unstoppable. Her magic still held power, but it no longer commanded absolute control. The spell was breaking, not with force, but with courage. One night, she walked the halls of her fortress and heard song. Not her song of enchantment, but a human song, sung by voices that had once been bound. It was rough, imperfect, but it carried strength. She froze, realizing the soldiers sang it in secret, their voices low but firm. They were no longer hers, no longer the king's. They were becoming their own. The kings confronted her in rage, their crowns gleaming, their voices filled with fury. "You are weak," they spat. "You let one man undo centuries of power. You were our weapon, but now you are nothing but a liability." They ordered her to execute the human, to crush the rebellion with fire and spell. But she stood in silence, her heart divided. She could not bring herself to destroy him, nor could she deny that the rebellion had already begun. The human looked at her that night with steady eyes. "They fear you," he said, "but you fear yourself. You can choose to stand with them, or you can choose to fall with the kings. But either way, the chains will break." She turned away, her chest burning with a storm of emotions. Never before had she been faced with a choice so heavy, so dangerous. For centuries her path had been clear: conquer, control, enslave. But now, the path forked, and whichever way she chose would change the galaxy. The rebellion grew bolder, no longer whispers but shouts. Fires burned in the camps, soldiers struck down their commanders, banners were torn apart. The fortress that once stood as a symbol of fear became a battlefield of voices rising together. The kings raged, summoning guards, ordering executions. But the more they demanded, the more resistance grew, and at the heart of it all stood the spellbinder, torn between two worlds. The world of chains that had built her throne, and the world of freedom that called to her through a human's laugh. The rebellion did not wait for her choice. It had already begun, and she knew, deep within, that soon she would have to decide, to crush it with her magic, or to let it burn away the chains she herself had built. The stars outside glimmered as if watching, as if waiting. The galaxy held its breath, for the spellbinder's decision would not only shape the rebellion, it would shape her. The rebellion roared louder each day. Soldiers broke ranks, banners were torn, and the kings watched their power slip like sand through open hands. The spellbinder stood at the center of it all, her heart divided, her mind in turmoil, her power no longer the unshakable force it had once been. The kings, once fearful of her strength, now feared her weakness, and fear in rulers always gave birth to betrayal. In the great hall, the kings gathered under banners of golden fire, their voices sharp as blades. "She hesitates," one declared. "She has lost control of the armies. She listens to the human. She allows him to poison her will." Another said. They looked at each other, their fear turning to decision. "If she will not be our weapon, then she will be our prisoner." That night, while the spellbinder walked the corridors of her fortress, guards she once commanded turned against her. Chains of dark iron, forged with runes older than her spells, wrapped around her wrists, her throat, her ankles. She fought, her power rising like fire, but the kings had prepared well. The chains drained her strength, pulling the light from her veins, binding her tighter with every struggle. For the first time in centuries, she fell to her knees. The kings stood over her, their faces twisted with triumph and fear. "You thought yourself a queen," they spat, "but you were always our tool. You are nothing without your spell, and now your spell is ours." They raised the chains higher, tightening them until she gasped for air. Her beauty dimmed, her glow faded, and she felt the weight of true captivity. In the dungeons below, the human heard the clamor of betrayal. Guards rushed past, shouting orders, carrying the chains that bound her. He realized the kings had turned on her. The woman who once enslaved armies was now enslaved herself. His heart, though bruised by her power, did not rejoice. Instead, he felt something unexpected, pity and something deeper, something he dared not name. That night, when the guards dragged her broken form into the cell beside his, the human leaned forward. Her hands trembled, her eyes dim, her pride shattered by betrayal. The spellbinder, the most feared woman in the galaxy, now sat in chains no magic could break. For a long moment, silence filled the dungeon, broken only by her ragged breath. Then the human spoke, his voice steady, calm, unyielding. So now you see, even you are not free. Her eyes flashed weakly, anger mixing with despair. They used me, she whispered. I was their weapon, their chain, and now I am their prisoner. Her voice cracked, a sound she had never allowed another to hear. The human leaned closer, his tone sharp. You built your throne on fear, and they built theirs on yours. Now you understand what it means to be bound. She turned away, unable to meet his gaze, yet his words burned like fire in her chest. The kings celebrated above, believing they had won. They paraded her chains before the armies, declaring her power broken. But instead of fear, whispers of rebellion grew louder. If even the spellbinder could be chained, then no one was untouchable. Her fall became not a warning, but a spark, a symbol that the kings could be defeated. In the darkness of her cell, she whispered to the human, I do not understand you. Why do you not laugh now? Why do you not rejoice in my fall? He shook his head slowly, his eyes steady. Because chains are chains, whether they bind soldiers, kings, or you. You called yourself free, but you were never free, not until you choose. His words struck deeper than the iron around her wrists. And in the silence that followed, she realized he was right. The rebellion above grew into flames. Soldiers turned on commanders, camps burned, and the kings struggled to control the chaos. The spellbinder and the humans sat in chains, yet outside the world moved, shifting, breaking, rebuilding. And though she was bound, she felt something stir within her. Not her old power, not her magic, but something smaller, sharper, more dangerous. Resolve. The kings believed her broken, but they had made a mistake. For in stripping away her chains of control, they had shown her what it truly meant to be bound. And in that knowledge, she found a new strength. A strength not of fear, but of choice. The human leaned against the wall, his laughter soft in the shadows. Chains don't last forever, he said quietly. She closed her eyes, her voice almost a whisper. Then perhaps one day, neither will mine. The fortress trembled with the sound of battle. Above the dungeon, soldiers clashed with commanders. Kings shouted in fury, and the rebellion that had begun as whispers now roared like a storm. The spellbinder sat in chains, her once radiant power dimmed, her pride broken, yet her spirit flickered with something new. Across from her, the human leaned against the cold wall, his smile unshaken, his laughter soft but steady. Even in the darkness, it carried strength, reminding her of everything she had tried to deny. The doors burst open, rebels storming the dungeons, their voices filled with fire. They had seen her chained, they had seen the kings falter, and now they rose with fury. The guards fell, the keys clattered to the ground, and the human's chains were the first to be broken. He stood tall, free at last, and yet he did not leave without looking at her. The spellbinder, once his captor, now sat helpless before him, her wrists bound in iron, her eyes uncertain for the first time in her life. Go, she said softly, her voice trembling. You are free. Leave me to my fate. But the human shook his head, stepping closer. I told you before, he said, his voice firm. Chains are chains, and no one deserves them. Not even you. She stared at him, unable to speak, as his hands reached for her bonds. The runes burned, the chains resisted, but together with the rebels, he broke them. And when the iron fell away, she breathed as if for the first time. The spellbinder rose to her feet, unsteady but no longer bound. For the first time, her power was not summoned by anger or fear, but by choice. The rebellion raged above. The kings wielded armies of loyalists, yet the tide was shifting. With the human by her side, She stepped into the light of battle, her voice no longer a weapon of chains, but a call for freedom. The soldiers froze as she appeared, her eyes glowing once more, her beauty radiant, but her presence different. No longer did her song enslave. Instead, it lifted, it inspired, it freed. Her voice rose over the battlefield, not weaving spells of submission, but breaking the last fragments of fear. The kings screamed in rage, commanding their loyalists to fight, but the armies faltered. One by one, soldiers cast aside their weapons, choosing freedom over fear. The human laughed again, the sound ringing across the valley like a bell of truth. It was not magic, it was not power, but it carried farther than any spell. The spellbinder felt it ripple through her, through the soldiers, through the galaxy itself. Her own heart, once bound by pride and chains, now beat with a strange and dangerous rhythm. Hope. The kings, desperate, charged with their guards, their crowns gleaming, their eyes wild with rage. "You betrayed us," they screamed. "You were ours, you will die with us." But the spellbinder stood tall, her power blazing, her chains gone. "No," she said, her voice steady, "I was never yours." She unleashed her magic, not to bind, but to destroy the thrones that had shackled her for so long. The ground split, the banners burned, and the kings fell into the fire they had built. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of laughter. The human stood at her side, his smile unbroken, his voice steady. "You see," he said, "fear ends, chains break, but laughter lasts." The spellbinder turned to him, her heart heavy with things she could not yet name. "You shatter my world," she whispered, with nothing but a laugh. "And you build another," he replied simply. The rebellion spread across the galaxy. Worlds once bound in silence now rose with voices of freedom. Her name, once feared, became a legend of redemption. The spellbinder who had enslaved armies was remembered not for chains, but for the moment she broke them. And at the center of it all was the human, whose laughter had turned fear into courage. Together, they walked into the dawn of a new age, not as captor and prisoner, not as sorceress and rebel, but as something greater, two souls who had broken the chains of empires, who had shown the galaxy that even the strongest spell could be shattered by a single laugh. The stars above seemed brighter, as if the universe itself had been freed. And in that endless sky, the spellbinder whispered words she had never thought she would speak. "It all began with you," she said softly, "with your laughter." The human smiled, his voice warm, his laughter rising once more. And the galaxy, listening, was forever changed.